you, Avi. If you're a small startup just starting your way and thinking about going to the growing insurance industry, I think you take example from these guys that spend a lot of time really learning the insurance industry and understanding what the needs of insurance people are. And I've known them since they started, and now they've been in London for a couple of months sitting and talking to underwriters and really spending a lot of time understanding where the business is going. And good luck to you guys. Our next presenter is Doron Davidson, co-founder and VP Business Development, Customer Success at SecBI Israel. Doron has over 15 years of experience in IT security and telecommunication. Before joining SecBI, he held operational and P&L responsibilities for RSA EMEA Professional Security Services practice. In his role, Doron worked with some of the world's largest security teams, helped them to establish a system and business processes at the heart of their incident response operation. He previously held product management, a technical position in Toyota. Beyond security, Schema and Amdocs, Doron is a big believer in Stephen Covey's 7 Habits and lecture on motivation. He's a CISSP and holds an MBA and I'm so stupid compared to these guys, and a BSc in computer science. So, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So my name is Doron Davidson, CISSP and so on. Let's put aside, and let's find now mine, which I saw before. Cool. So we've heard before from Aviram about the evolved system, about how different government agencies can now recommend you what kind of systems you may put in place and so on. And while I think it is important to understand what kind of systems you should deploy within your organization to make sure that you are safe, we need to remember that today's most of the attacks and most of the real breaches that we hear about are not because of lack of systems. If anything, it's because of too many systems, it's because of missing integration, it's because of misconfigurations of all of those systems and so on. So really, if we think about threats today and why within cyber insurance you need to think about more than just what kind of systems you have in place, we need to understand how attacks are actually happening. And we see that attacks today basically are trying to hide as benign activities. They are hiding as benign activities. They bypass most of the existing prevention systems, and as a result, there are real active successful breaches happening every single day. And they're happening because most of the detection systems today are based on are very noisy. They generate a lot of false positives. They are looking for anomalies. They are based on either anomaly detection or some kind of statistical analysis. Either that, or they generate sporadic anomalies whereby you can see that someone had logged in at 2 a.m. and 2 days later someone had exfiltrated data from the organization, but no one really tells you the full story of how the attack had started, how it moved from one employee to another, and how data was eventually exfiltrated from the organization. And even more than that, what's the risk for the organization, whether any of the crown jewels were actually affected by that specific breach. So all of that pulls you down to a very long and complex hunting process within the organization, and the obvious security gaps of partial remediations, probably the worst thing that can happen within organizations today, where you've already detected something, or the CERT might have alerted you that something might have happened. You've invested a lot of time, hours, systems, man days, money to investigate, and eventually you only find and detect part of the attack, partial attack, and thus you remediate only part of the full scope of the attack. Either that, or long dwell times of attacks within organizations, undetected threats, and so on and so forth. So really what's missing today from a visibility perspective within organization, and as such, the visibility for insurers today, is to really understand the full scope of attacks and full scope of the risk within organization. Now, have you noticed that the only way today to exfiltrate data from organization is via network. Now we're all looking for more and more unintrusive ways to understand what's the risk within organizations. And if you look at the network, if you analyze the network data or based on the logs themselves of the network, then you can actually see the full scope of the risk of the network of an organization. And that's what we see today. More and more insurers are actually looking to add to their calculation of the risk of the state of the organization. So by adding by adding systems that can look at the full scope of attacks and the full network analysis, you can actually add the risk. The risk score that insurers are looking to have in order to safely to better calculate the risk of the organization. So how does SecBI does that? And there are many different technologies out there, by the way, most of which, again, are either using anomaly detection and likewise. The thing is that cyber security is changing every single day. And we see that attacks are changing every single day. They're getting better and better attackers out there at trying to mimic benign activity. And we see that most of the data that we gather today within organizations looks like benign activity. And that's where the malicious activities are also hiding. As opposed to that, the alerts that most organizations get today based on predefined rules, that's where over 90% of the false positives come from predefined rules that security teams are defining within the organization. So what we do a bit differently is basically taking all of this information and then utilizing unsupervised machine learning in order to cluster the information based on behaviors. In this first time, you can actually see behaviors of similar activities within the organization that would represent the risk for the organization of a specific attack. But now you don't see just one user and the risk that he poses to the organization, but rather if the attack is actually attacking several users, or there is some kind of campaign within the organization, all of that would be within one single incident, one single cluster of data, which means that when you now calculate the risk of that specific attack against the organization, you have all the users, all the hosts, all the crown jewels that might be affected, the PII data that might be affected by this specific attack within one single place to make it easier for the organization, one, to remediate, and two, to make sure that it does not repeat itself in future similar cases. Once you have such ready-made cluster, then it's kind of easier to run using supervised machine learning at each and every one of those clusters to also add some context for the analyst. To go and look at the cluster of data to be able to say, well, yes, we took a lot of what seemed to be benign activities before, and after clustering it, and you can see that as the face of the horse there, actually this looks like cryptojacking attack. With all the devices, the fileless attack, the mining pool, and so on. It might be that some of the data generated mainly alerts, but really, when you look at the cluster, you understand that within or between those alerts, there's a full story, including attacks against against information that you were not aware of before that was actually stolen from the organization. And probably the worst thing that we see, by the way, within a security operations center is where you had one single alert and you started drilling in, slicing, dicing, querying, and so on, spending a lot of time in gathering additional information to eventually understand that this is actually a benign activity, and it's important to be able to clear that out of the queue. When you then take all of this, what now you understand what are the different risks within the organization, within the network of the organization. You add to that other risk factors within the organization, you can actually calculate the risk of the network itself for that specific organization. And we see, and we provide today several such use cases, where the one that is more relevant to this session is actually working with insurers. And we are working with a couple of insurers today to, one, be able to better calculate the risk of the network itself, being able to automatically, without having to install anything on site, without having to install additional hardware, by utilizing existing data within the organization to extract the risk of the network for that specific organization, and based on based on that, ensure the organization or decide what should be the premium and so on. Alternatively, they, just as any other enterprise, are also a part of a very complex network today, where there are additional risks that pose to them as well. One, as a complex network with agents, with offices all across the world, and you need to be able to also protect yourself as an insurer, because you by yourself are holding a lot of information about many of your customers that, had that been also disclosed, might be devastating for those organizations as well. And I'm looking forward for continuing the discussion. Thank you.